Dr. D once said, "No one knows the truth except God." Maybe. We agree with him as far as the first proposition is concerned. As a matter of fact, all scientists, including the linguists, work by approximations. So take, for example, the transformation rule in English known as question tag. Suppose you had, "She is brave, isn't she?" So for the linguist and the English child, mentally, they would both form the rule as follows: copy the verb to the right of the sentence, make it negative, and copy the subject to the right of the newly copied verb, and end up by a question mark or the phonetic contour. Now suppose someone said, "Greta is saving the world," applying the first rule. Isn't Greta? No, and grammatical. So you need a second approximation which says copy a pronoun of the subject. Okay. Suppose you heard Greta could have died. Didn't she? No. So a third approximation would say copy the first verb and so on and so forth in your linguistic research by successive approximations. See Acadian. Greta could have died, couldn't she? That's good. Now suppose you're visited by a familiar friend who would not be offended if you said to him, "Serve yourself, won't you?" One shouldn't be offended for no good reason. And here I still remember my story with my Egyptian student and my English supervisor. The Egyptian was offended for no good reason, while the English supervisor of mine presented more flexibility. Okay, so serve yourself, won't you? How would you apply Chomsky's standard theory to generate such a sentence? Well, first we have to define Chomsky's standard theory. That was in the 60s that brought Chomsky all his fame and money, I suppose, Draham. The standard theory consists of three components: phrase structure rules, lexical rules, and transformation rules, where phrase structure rules are context-free. You do not need any previous condition to say that in English the sentence consists of a subject followed by an auxiliary, followed by a verb, and ending by an object. So it's context-free. Then the lexicon comes into play to say that serve is a transitive verb, the context of which is preceded by a noun phrase and followed by a noun phrase and an optional noun phrase. That is the syntactic context. We'll come to semantics in a moment. You serve yourself to some muffin. Phrase structures together with the lexicon yield the deep structure, which is the simplest form possible, not a sentence, strictly speaking. For example, John killed John. This is a deep structure. It is at the boundary between syntax and semantics. It either means that the two Johns are co-referent, in which case you have to apply the reflexivization transformation. John killed himself. Or in the case of free reference, that is two persons, you pronominalize. John killed him. Sorry about all those killings around this modern world. By opposition to PS rule, transformations are context sensitive. You cannot passivize the sentence Greta came, because this sentence lacks an object NP. By opposition to Greta helped the Palestinians, you pacifize. The Palestinians were helped by Greta. Transformations are an input-output system, just like what happens in the windy city of Chicago the cows go in alive and come out in the form of tinned beef. So the deep structure is at the boundary between syntax and semantics. See LANGACKER and Ben Roche, PhD, Dublin, 1999. The deep structure of our sentence is you will serve you. And then it needs a cycle of 3 successive well-ordered transformations: reflexivization, tag question, and imperative deletion. To read the surface structure, serve yourself, won't you? How do we reach this final output? It is a cycle. It is like making coffee. You cannot put the fire first, and then the coffee, and finally the water. You have to respect the cycle: water first, then coffee, and finally lit the fire. As the singer would say, I bring you to burn, I bring you to learn, fire. No, the same thing applies to this sentence. See Richard KAYNE from the City University of New York, who speaks about bleeding and feeding. You bleed a transformation if you do not leave the context for the next. For instance, if you start with the imperative, serve you, won't you, there is no first NP to connect to the second through reflexivization. So start by question tag. You will serve you, won't you? Then reflexivization. You will serve yourself, won't you? And finally, imperative deletion. Serve yourself, won't you? This is the surface structure.